Hello, this is Becky Annison and we are now on episode 2 of Tales from Westwick. We have had a really busy week since I last recorded because it is harvest time and it's autumn, and even though we didn't really grow a vegetable garden this year, we have got absolutely mountains of things coming in. I'm going to try and remember some of them now. We have picked 1.8 kilos of blackberries, which are now in the freezer, and there's a little bit of video that I'm going to put in later to show you that. We have picked 6 kilos of damsons. I've got a little bit of video of that, which I'm going to put in to this a bit later. How cool is that? The apple trees are falling over. The crab apples are totally ready to pop, if not already popping, so we need to get on with harvesting the crab apples. We've been picking a few rose hips, and we've still got the eggs coming in. So all in all, pretty busy. Oh, and the elderberries. Elderberries are happening, and I was hoping to make elderberry cordial this year, so we need to get on that too. So we've got a really busy weekend ahead of jam making and cordial making, and maybe some apple pie filling making. I have this idea that maybe I should start learning how to can, like American style canning. I think that's what we in England call bottling. This is a whole new skill area that I have never looked at before. So I've made jam and chutney and pickles and cordials and all of that stuff for just years now. But I started looking at canning recently, and wow, that's some scary stuff to do with botulism. I'm sure that once I'm on top of it and I've learnt all the things that I need to know, I'm going to calm down about the botulism. But I remember that we got quite worried about botulism when we were making salami last year. We never had a scare or anything, but it was just something we were looking at and going, "Ooh, gosh, don't want to be feeding that to our kids on top of pizza." Yeah, if I do get round to apple pie filling canning, then there's a lot of research that I'm going to need to do beforehand. I'm not sure I'm going to have time before the apple harvest hits properly, so that might be something on next year's list. There we go. So we've also been getting a decent amount of eggs, which is brilliant. So since the 1st of September, we've been getting 2 eggs a day out of our chickens, which means we're now up to, I'm just going to check my figures over here, 18 eggs in September. We had 17 eggs in August. That's still not quite enough eggs. We eat a lot of eggs in our family. So we're not buying eggs. We're not buying eggs, but we are deliberately not eating eggs as frequently as we normally would do. We saved up all of our eggs to make a Bakewell pudding. We had a friend come to visit this weekend, and I had promised him that I would make him a Bakewell pudding, and I did. I'm going to put a link to the recipe in the show notes. That's a recipe on our blog. I have to clarify here, a Bakewell pudding is not the same thing as a Bakewell tart. They are very, very different desserts, and you should never make the mistake of confusing them if you're in Bakewell. But the awesome thing about a Bakewell pudding is that, my recipe for a Bakewell pudding requires 8 eggs and 2 egg whites. And that means that you have 6 egg whites left over. And one day we will probably crack meringues, but today is not that day. So these days, every time we make a Bakewell pudding, we also make a triple quantity of almond macaroon biscuits. So we have been enjoying almond macaroon biscuits, which Josh made the other day. Oh, they're so yummy. They're just the yummiest things, and they're really, really easy. So I'll put a link in the show notes to almond macaroon biscuits, because they're the perfect marriage with Bakewell pudding and almond macaroon biscuits, and then you have no waste at all, which is fantastic. Speaking of which, we are currently in the middle of No Waste Week, which is Ray Strassman's kind of project to encourage people to look at what they're doing and how they're wasting. And whilst we're not officially participating this year like we did in previous years, we are just looking at our leftover food waste again, and seeing what we can do about that this week. So I will put a link in the show notes to Zero Waste Week. Wow, there's going to be a lot of links in this show notes. So now I'm going to talk about what I'm knitting. So I finished sewing the dinosaur jumper up, and Rafi has been wearing it and says it's itchy. Great. I'm sure it's just hot. It was just hot and he was wearing a t-shirt. It'll probably be fine in the winter. I've been doing a lot of knitting on the baby surprise jacket, which I can show you now, because it's got to that funny wibbly wobbly stage where, can you even see this? Oh, can you see this okay? There we go. It's got to the stage where you're thinking to yourself, how can this possibly become a jacket? And I've been flipping it around, and I've worked out how it's going to work. And I understand, like in my head now, I understand how this becomes a jacket. What I don't understand is how Elizabeth Zimmerman ever looked at a baby jacket and thought, you know what we need to do, how we need to knit this, and then came up with her pattern, because it really is just like mind-blowingly complicated when you're thinking about designing it. But it's really, really fun and simple to knit. And the yarn for that was It's a Stitch Up. I got it wrong last week. I'm sorry. The link was right, but I got the name wrong. It's a Stitch Up in their awesome Aran. And this is the suffragette colourway, which is now up and available to the general public. So go forth and buy some British produced ethical yarn from a really fantastic indie dyer. What else am I doing? I did the mending that I said I was going to do. I customised the baby grow, and that now fits nicely. And I have 2 mending projects this week. So my first mending project is a bit big to bring in here. Jossie's dressing gown has, like all dressing gowns, it has this kind of little horizontal piece of tape across the back of the neck for hanging it on hooks on the back of doors, and that's snapped twice now, so I'm going to have to put that back on, because it really is a bit too convenient being able to hang things on the back of doors when they're the size of a dressing gown. The other thing that I'm doing is sock mending. Next week I figured maybe I'll try and do a little mending video to show you how I do that. This week I'm just going to show you the socks. So I've knit, gosh, maybe over the years 150 pairs of socks or more, can't quite remember. It's quite normal for them to get holes in. It takes me, because I have timed this, 8 hours per sock, 16 hours for a pair. And when you put 16 hours of work into a sock and you've paid for the sock yarn on top of that, when you get a hole in it, when I get a hole in it, I do not throw it away. I mend it, and some of my socks have probably 9 or 10 darns in them now, which is quite exciting. You can see that this pair of socks has already been darned once in this heel and once in the other heel. It's not the heel that's gone this time, it's the toe. So it usually takes me, because I've measured this as well, about half an hour to plug a hole in a sock, as long as the hole isn't too big. So set aside half an hour this week to try and get that done. I haven't been doing as much knitting as I thought I would this week, because I've got some RSI in my shoulder. There was one day when I was so desperate to carry on knitting because the pattern was so exciting that I just popped some Nurofen and carried on going, but do not do that, knit kids. That is a very bad idea, and I am paying for it now. I will probably do it again at some point in my life. I might be doing it today, but I really shouldn't, and you definitely shouldn't. So that's what I'm mending, that's what I'm knitting, that's what's going on in our garden and what we're cooking. So that's pretty much everything now. So zip on over and enjoy some gorgeous shots of Blackberries and Damsons which are coming up. So I hope you can see that. These are some of the Blackberries that we've got in our chicken pen, and Raffi and I are just picking them at the moment. You can see some of the bowl that we've already picked. There we go. So even though we didn't have the chance to grow many vegetables this year, we still have an awful lot of berries that we're making the most of, and these will be going in the freezer, and I'm going to show you how I freeze them later on. So this is how I freeze my blackberries. I use a baking sheet, as you can see here. Oh, there's a blackberry on it, I'll get rid of that. Then I put some baking parchment or grease-proof paper over the baking sheet, and then I put my blackberries on top in a single layer. Now this is a layer that I've already done. You can see here there's a bit of frost because these are already frozen. And I'm about to take these blackberries and put them into this bag which is where I put the blackberries after they've frozen in these individual layers. And what this does is it means that when you come to use your blackberries, they are free flowing. So they're not just frozen together in one massive lump. So you can pour out as much as you, or as little as you want. And that means that you can use them more efficiently, because you might just want like a small handful to go on top of your porridge, or you might want to make a massive crumble. This gives you a lot of choice and a lot of options about how you use your frozen berry harvest. And I use this for black currants, white currants, any sort of berry that you want to have on hand in the freezer. I don't use it for things like strawberries, because frankly they never make it to the freezer, they all get eaten up. So that was the blackberries, and now, as promised, we're going to whiz over to the damsons. So talking again about the fruit that we already had growing in our garden, that we just need to harvest and process. This is probably the most precious crop we have. There are my harvesting containers from my recycled cleaning vinegar. And this is going to be in addition to the probably kilo I've already got stashed away in the freezer from last year when we had a very poor harvest. But these, if you don't know what they are damsons. They are a very small member of the plum family, not as small as sloes or bullaces, which are wild plums in the same family. These are sort of the next step up in terms of size between a bullace and a Victoria style plum that is built for eating raw. You can eat these raw. They're quite tart and they will make your mouth kind of pucker up, but what we use these for is two things mostly. Firstly, Damson jam. Damson jam is probably the most delicious jam you'll ever experience in your life, but it's really hard to buy in the shops. I make it from our damsons every single year, and every single year it goes in a flash as friends and family all get to take their tithe, and then we get through it pretty quickly as well, because we don't only use it on our toast, but we also use it in cooking. So I always use my homemade damson jam to make linzertort, and I use my homemade damson jam to make bakewell pudding. That's not traditional. Normally you would use strawberry, but I think that's far too sweet, so I use damson. And I'll put a link in the show notes to the bakewell pudding recipe that's already on the blog. The second recipe that we'll be making with these is damson gin, and I made this for the first time probably 2 years ago now, and it went a lot faster than we expected. I couldn't quite believe how much people enjoyed it. And I will put a link in the show notes again to the recipe for damson gin that I use. But yeah, so this is our damson harvest, and over the next couple of days it's going to be turned into as much jam and gin as we can handle, or as other people can handle, because actually I can't drink alcohol, I have an allergy to it. But there you go, damsons. If you ever manage to get your hands on these beautiful treasures, then do it and make jam, do it. So it's been a busy week here, trying to keep up with everything that's going on harvest wise, as well as thinking about canning, knitting, mending, looking after the chickens, and yeah, it's all good really, it's all pretty good. So thank you very much for tuning in. I'm hoping I'll be able to get out an episode 3 next week, that would be pretty good, and see you then. Goodbye everybody.